Good evening and a warm welcome to all the panelists and to the audience who have joined us today.
Good evening.
That we have picked for today is simple ways of envisioning a complex B2B value chain. Innovation in B2B seems a lot more complex for multiple reasons. One, there are more touch points in a B2B value chain as compared to a B2C. And two, most of the times the end user is not the customer. So the value drive objective goes beyond our immediate customer to a customer's customer and so on. And three, most importantly, all the people involved across the multiple touch points are after all human beings, and all of us are spoiled by B2C personalized campaigns and targeted ads. And so we have to make sure that whatever we do resonates with the customer without overlooking the human touch and the emotional aspect. So that makes a B2B value chain a lot more complex compared to B2C. So when we talk of innovation, how do we drive innovation across a B2B value chain and stay resonating with the customer? That's the question we are trying to find out answers for today. And to discuss this, we have an amazing panel who have pioneered innovative solutions to customers across B2B value chain. Without much ado, I would like to introduce the panel to the audience right away. We first have Mr. Samir Gulve. He's called Sam by his colleagues. He is the managing director of EFI India. It's a multinational based in Silicon Valley and international leader in digital print technology. Welcome to the show, Sam.
Hi, thank you. Thank you for having me.
We also have Dr. Sudhindra Kaushik. He's a vice president of IEEE TEMS, and he's also the founding director of Women in Big Data India. Recently, he's also taken over as the innovation director at Volvo India Private Limited. Congratulations and welcome to the show, Sudhindra.
Many congratulations.
Thank you, Raghavendra. Thank you, Asha. Happy to be here.
And we have Mr. Raghavendra Pai. He's the Associate Vice President and Business Head of QMI from the Murugappa Group. Needs no introduction. They are into refractories, abrasives, and many other industrial products. And pleasure to have Raghavendra Pai, who have had an opportunity to work with on various platforms. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much.
So if I can start the panel with your permission.
Sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
When we talk of innovation for a common man like me, I would say, the first thing that comes to mind is innovation is something beyond a normal brain. It needs a genius to be innovative. A normal brain, probably the cerebral cortex cannot be innovative or does not have enough of gray matter to think innovatively. So we only think it's only a genius that can think innovatively. But Thomas Edison has said that innovation is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration. So what exactly is innovation if you were to define it? Can I start with Sam?
Sure. You know, in my view, when you start with a proven worthwhile problem or an opportunity and find a way to make it faster, better, and cheaper to the affected parties, whether they are users, whether they are businesses, etc. That's what we used to do: make something faster, better, cheaper. And if you can make all the three things at the same time with something, then you have something that is likely to be successful. I do agree. The idea hypothesis is only a small fraction of the overall success. Many people have ideas. Ideas are like belly buttons. Everybody has them. Translating that idea, making it work within the constraints of the ecosystem that it targets is a hard problem. And it requires, the idea is one thing. You need hundreds of ideas along the way to solve the multitude of problems that you will face, while bringing this innovation to fruition. And so that's where everybody gets tested, and a lot of people drop out, give up, So to me, make something that's worthwhile, faster, better, and cheaper. Make sure that you're navigating that whole conversion of the idea into an end product or solution, where 99% of the hard work is.
So it's a journey. Innovation is a long journey, and idea is just the starting point.
Yeah, it's just the spark that begins.
This is a spark. Thank you, Sam. Thanks for those insights. Sudhindra, how would you define innovation for us?
Well, when I did my PhD, I learned from another professor that once you have a PhD, you're eligible to have your own definition. So
Right.
I said, okay, time to make my own.
That'll be interesting.
But I had this view of what Sam said, that innovation should be something new and useful. If you look at it carefully, again, what Sam said about ideas, the new part is easy. Practically even idiots can come up with something new. That's not a problem at all. But making that something new is useful, that takes a lot of art, science put together. Now, if you look at how the startup world looks at innovation, is that's their sole route for becoming what they are, a plant and maybe a tree later. So if you look at the useful part, 95% of them don't get it right. The trick is very simple, because when somebody makes an innovation, they think it's useful. Otherwise, they wouldn't do it in the first place, right? But the point is, they are not the ones who are eligible to declare it is useful. So who is eligible to declare it is useful is somebody who's going to pay for it. In that context, also coming back to your intro, B2B and B2C makes a difference. Let me give an example. You and me will use an ATM machine, but we'll never sit and discuss which ATM machine SBI should buy or an ICICI should buy. But ICICI Bank will never use an ATM machine except to load the cash from the behind, not from the front. So we get to use it, they get to pay it. So the innovation useful part then becomes very interesting and difficult at the same time, because the usefulness is decided by somebody who has money in their pocket. Now, coming to the genius or not genius part, it's a very common question I also get asked often. Many times we think somebody is genius because they can do something very fast, above normal speed, and that's about it. For example, a good cricketer has, for a given particular ball, sorry, I'm a techie cricketer, not just.
Please.
So a normal batsman, good average batsman, has a good stroke to a particular length and line of a ball. But a genius batsman has 4 possible strokes. So he can go back and play, he can pull it, so that genius part makes something faster, not necessarily better. So as an innovator and innovation, everybody can try to do this new and useful thing. And maybe some people are a little bit slower than others, but that should not matter actually too much. So that's the link in a way to what you asked, Asha.
Right. So as long as it's adding value to the end user, it can be termed as innovation. If it doesn't, no matter how great the idea is, it's hard to call it. I mean, it doesn't make sense to call it innovation, right?
Yeah. See, very simply put, if it doesn't make money, it's a hobby, and companies should not pay employees, money to develop their hobbies.
Right. Right. This is probably why when a person starts with a new idea and they try to take a survey of the customers, many people come out with responses saying, oh, it's a great idea. but when they actually start charging, probably 8 out of 10 drop out.
Yeah.
Then we know how valuable the idea is.
Yeah, no, like you said, Sam said earlier, everybody says it's a great idea till you ask them to take money out of their pocket.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, just to add to that very quickly, we all live with several problems. We only have a wherewithal to address a subset of problems at any given time,
Right.
for which we have resources, money to speak of. So if you go and ask customers, is this valuable or useful? The answer may be yes, but is it valuable or useful enough for you to pay me? And the answer will change very fast.
Absolutely.
So, I think that is the ultimate test.
Right. Makes sense.
Yeah.
Thank you. Raghvendra, would you add to those insights? From your perspective?
I actually, the tagline of faster, better, cheaper is what we also use, as a part of our strategy map, to define our services and in our competitive landscape. So adding on to what Sudhindra said, I would basically, look at it, translating an idea into solution, which basically adds value from the perspective of the customer. So whoever is our customer, if it does not add value, like as Samir rightly said, it's of not much use. So that's how I would look at it.
Yeah, so we need to have a customer-centric approach when we talk of innovation.
Absolutely.
Thank
Since you mentioned Edison, maybe I would like to add something that he said along with what the 1% and 99%. He said, I've tried to figure out what my customers need, then I go about inventing it. That's exactly what he said.
Right.
So that's what we are summarizing this point as.
Right. But if we were to look at Elon Musk, because you mentioned that, it comes to my mind, he innovates something and then tries to create a need for the customer, right? So he creates something that customer didn't even know that they wanted.
So Asha, Apple is famous for that. And
Right.
I think the difference comes from the following.
Right.
There are two sources for innovation. One is problem that your potential customers are facing, and second is opportunity. Not everybody is aware of the opportunities
Absolutely.
that can add significant value to their lives or to their businesses. And so when you're creating a new opportunity for making something faster and better and cheaper, you probably will not get the what, from the customer. But if it is a problem, then you will get the what. And that's why I find that, high percent of innovation, 75% to 25%, to just throw numbers out, is targeting problems versus 25% targeting opportunity.
Right. So they're both good, and probably the latter carries more weightage, would you say?
Yeah, it does definitely, because once the customer is aware of a problem, to the extent that they're willing to spend for it, it is quickly a public knowledge.
Right.
So the competition can develop much faster. When it's opportunity oriented, it takes a longer time for the competition to catch up.
Right, that's true. So interesting. Thank you, Sam. According to the World Economic Forum, I was reading some statistics that innovative mindset is going to be one of the most sought after skills that prospective employers will look for going forward. So if somebody were to qualify for that, what kind of skill sets do you think they should be acquiring? Sam?
This is, unfortunately, a long list. I wish I can distill it down to 2 or 3 traits that one can check box it. But really, I call it entrepreneurial mindset more than the innovation mindset. And simply because, innovation has a little more connotation towards idea, whereas entrepreneurs has a more of a meaning towards bringing it to fruition, making it count, etc., not stopping at the idea. So, when you look at this, persistence, I would say, is most important. There are going to be many times along the way where you're going to sort of question whether it's worth it. You're going to use a creative excuse to sort of stop pursuing it and so on. So persistence is absolutely very important. Objectivity or open-mindedness is also equally important, because I have rarely seen, and I've been involved with several startups during my early part of the career in the US, in the Silicon Valley-based startups. Some of them were really game-changing companies.
Okay.
You never end with what you started with. You go in that general direction, but the idea evolves hundreds of times, literally along the way. And if you are stubborn, then you will never be able to kind of create that product market fit, which is critically important. So open-mindedness, problem solving, one innovation, taking it to the market, actually translates into hundreds and hundreds of problems that you will have to solve along the way. Big picture understanding. A lot of people focus on, just the idea part, but every idea has to exist in some environment, and that environment has constraints. For example, you can come up with this fancy product to make printing better, but the operators are a lot of them are uneducated, and so they will not be able to use your product. So those are constraints that you're going to face in the market. So you got to distill it in a way that it's going to be easy for them to use. Ability to learn on fly. You are going to have to learn a lot of new things along the way. That you're way out of your comfort zone. Every entrepreneur, whether they like it or not, have to learn enough about financial analysis to see whether it's worth it to even pursue it. Structured or organized way of problem solving. It's a lot of times people will look at it and say, well, innovation is about this, wild-haired scientists just coming with ideas from the seat of their pants. And that's not true. It's problem solving that requires very organized way of going about solving the problem. So that definitely helps. Ability to listen, ability to influence. You are going to have to convince so many people along the way if this is going to succeed. Ability to visualize, because oftentimes, you are trying to project something out there without having any precedence for it. So that is important. So again, like I said, there are several traits. It's not a short list.
Right. I like what you said. I think we start with something and then we keep pivoting to another idea until we come to a stage when the customer is actually ready to pay for it. So I think that makes great sense. Thank you, Sam. Sudhindra, no better person than you to tell us what it needs to have an innovative mindset. You have done so many courses, so many TEDx talks. So can you please share some insights on what people should want, what people can look for to learn to develop an innovative mindset?
True. So there is something, like I said, one of my research topics is also what makes up a good innovator. Like Sam said, in our model, we have a 12 skills model to profile an innovator, which will reasonably well. No model is perfect, neither is this, but it gives a fair idea of all those things in the phase of a complete innovation, starting till end, which involves observation and stuff like that. But from a broader skill set perspective, from a learning perspective, World Economic Forum's pitch can be broken down into 3 pieces. Mm-hmm. One is complex problem solving, critical thinking, and creativity. Nobody is good in all these 3 equally well. Somebody is good in critical thinking, somebody is good in creativity, and so on. But we should understand why this is the way it is, because today every technology is diffusing with another technology. In automotive world, we always say, is it software on wheels or wheels with software?
Right.
Depends whether it's a 50% software or 70% software.
Right.
So it's a mechanical product or it's a embedded system. So a CT scanner is not a mechanical product nor a phone. So nothing is one single domain product anymore. So cutting across different technologies, you need people who can understand the complexity. In my assessment, data is not the new oil to me. Contextualizing data is a new oil. I mean, because it's so complex. What means one thing to me could mean something else to Sam or Raghavendra or anybody else. It could be not even a problem, right? So contextualizing is the complex problem-solving skill. Critical thinking is how do you actually put a finger on the actual cause? So causality versus correlation. That's a skill you need to get practice and get better at. And of course, creativity. At some stage of the innovation process, you need creativity as well. So if somebody can focus on developing critical thinking, creativity, and complex problem solving, I think they'll be quite future-proof, to be frank.
Right, but how big is a challenge to identify the gap or the pain point?
That's what the critical thinking is. The savior there. You have to be ruthless in a way. See, 95% of the startups fail, and I work with some startups in Canada as well. There it's 92%. It's not a big deal, right? So we're still talking about the same order of magnitude. Number one reason is they build product which nobody wants.
Right.
If you think about it, they're not idiots. They're very accomplished people, very knowledgeable, well-studied, successful in their own careers. But when they start something, they miss the value that actually the pain point. So they get carried away by the solution rather than the problem. Right. And they will face the consequence. See, in the end, nobody will buy a product because somebody else made it. Okay. I always give the example of the peanut guy in pre-COVID, of course, in front of the bus stops and IT parks. 10 rupees. Most of us like peanuts, but we don't buy it every day. We walk past him, but we don't buy some days. So I ask people, okay, those days you don't want to buy, give him 10 rupees and walk across. He said, why would I do that? It's so strange. Yeah, that's exactly the point. You will not give 10 rupees if you don't get anything in return worth 10 rupees. Right. So nobody spends a pie if they don't believe they can get a return for their money's worth. That's exactly where the pain point has to be caught. So, for example, a lot of people chase these non-existent problems. So that's where critical thinking becomes very important to find the pain point.
Interesting. So on the days that we don't need those peanuts, they mean nothing to us.
Yeah, I mean, we can afford $10. They say, oh no, why should I pay $10? I said, why do you pay $500 tips in a 5-star hotel?
Right.
You also get nothing in return, not even the bill, because bill is already given. So
right.
What do you get in return? Nothing.
Exactly.
So, but there is something they attach as, how do they look for other people who are possibly looking at them, consciousness, self-esteem, whatever you want to call. But they get something in return according to the guy who has money. So he gets to decide whether he gives $10 or 500 or nothing.
Right. Thank you, Sudhindra. Raghavendra, you're dealing with products that are hugely technical, right? And you're dealing with B2B customers, and probably there are multiple touch points beyond your immediate customer as well. So if you are to be recruiting people, both in the non-technical and the technical side, what kind of skills do you think will meet your expectations of an innovative mindset?
Yeah, drawing on further from what Sudhindra was mentioning, I would think on critical skills because, as he rightly said, to understand what the customer is telling and what exactly he wants is very, very important and will make the difference between you have a success or a failure. Because if we are not clear what the customer wants, and then translate that need into what we need to do, back at our end in terms of design or the process or the manufacturing and so on, it will not be a success. So I think critical thinking is very, very important. Apart from that, I think the ability to just question the status quo, that also is very important. Otherwise, we will not unlearn and progress. So
Right.
this is what I believe.
Yeah, interesting.
You know, I just want to, Asha, just make a comment. You know, there is this sort of focus on what customer wants. And I'm going to try and modify that just a bit. And here is the reason why. You know, when you ask somebody, what do you want? They start describing you the solution rather than the problem. That is like going to a doctor and the doctor asking you, what do you want? Well, I want those blue pills. Okay. But what is your problem? Right? Let the doctor be the expert. You tell me your symptoms and your problem. And so it's more important to focus on what the customer needs.
Right.
What
he wants.
It sounds like a subtle difference, but I think it's important in the end.
True. That makes so much sense. Maybe because if we try to address what they want and finally doesn't satisfy their need, then it's no use again, right?
Yeah, I mean, they'll say, well, I thought that's what I wanted, but really my pain was on this side. So I think it's important to kind of, and you know, when you have the conversation with customers, they will often try to tell you the how rather than the what. And it's extremely important to kind of keep them focused on the what.
That's such a practical.
And on the lighter side, the Google doctors of today are doing exactly what you said. They're going to doctor and say,
absolutely.
That's a very practical insight, Sam. Sam, earlier you were trying to draw a parallel of entrepreneurship when we were talking of innovation, and rightfully so. And Raghavendra was also mentioning about unlearning few things when we talk of innovation. So if we were to entrust an innovative project to someone, would you rather give it to a large organization that has abundant of resources, or would you rather give it to a startup that's not having much to unlearn and does not have a baggage to carry?
Does it have to be mutually exclusive?
Yeah.
You know, here is the thing. You know, I was lucky enough to have had 36 years spanning very large companies and very small startups, at least when they began. And, you know, there are definitely advantages of each side, but in the long run, I believe a startup is better poised. And simply because, you know, without that, the startups won't exist.
Right.
Because, you know, the Googles, the Ciscos, the Intels, the large, the tech mafia why would they keep the door open, right? I find it a lot easier to convince a venture capitalist whose business is to assess risk, reward equation day in, day out, hundreds of times a day, than to convince, you know, large the decision makers within a large corporation. Sure, they have the resources, but a lot of times the resources are optimized to, you know, execution at the cost of everything else at times. So there's an impedance mismatch at times. So personally, I think it would be great if it's a startup. You can have an internal startup inside a large company, but have the ability to tap into some of the key infrastructure of a large company, i.e. access to customer for once, right? For a startup, it is going to be extremely hard to start, you know, to come out of nowhere and have the access. And without those customer discussions, it's not going to go very far, as others have pointed out already in the discussion so far. So my personal preference, having done both, you know, is that a focus team that is chasing a problem unencumbered with the big machinery, the big process, the complexity of the structure, etc. I mean, I look at it as a difference between Army and Marines.
Right.
Okay. The army is the big infantry, big infrastructure. It takes time to turn and so on, whereas Marines are very agile force. And since you are going to evolve anyways, it's important. Agility is most important.
Lovely example. Sudhindra, your take on that?
Yeah, so I would look at the skill set of either, because like I said, in our modeling, we have looked at the roles that a successful innovator has to play. And I also mentioned that no one individual has the three skills that we say. From a roles perspective, we say to succeed in innovation, one, you need to be a thinker. Another role you have to don successfully is the doer, execution. Then the third one is articulation, marketing, or whichever word you want to call. How do you tell how your solution or innovation benefits your potential target customer? Like I said, seldom you have one individual having these three. So that means obviously we're talking about a good team. So whichever the startup or the large company, whichever can exhibit or has already proven this skill set will be my preference. Because very often what happens, and I've seen, is there is a group of people, but they're not designed to be together. So they're all thinkers or they're all doers. So if you have only thinkers, you have nothing to do. If you have only doers, you have nothing to do about. And if you have thinkers and doers, you don't know how to communicate. If you have communicators, you don't know what they have to do. So it's a very carefully designed team composition in terms of skill set. And I would look at how they operate rather than whether they're big or small, because both, like Sam said, have plus minus.
Right. So would you outsource teams if necessary, and try to bring about a harmonious blend of the operational team and an outsourced team who are probably just thinkers?
There is a catch with engineers, especially. I'm assuming many are on the call are engineers. This is what we call the NIH syndrome. The moment you tell an engineering team you're going to work with some other team, the not invented here syndrome, NIH kicks in. The moment it kicks in, it brings up a storm of ownership issues. So whatever the other team, however good they are, they start to complain about it. So yes, we can work with some part done with collaboration is going to be the future. There is no doubt about it in my mind. But you have to prepare people that the collaboration does not, let's say, inhibit their possibilities to do things, nor it should make them insecure. So we should, to be frank, I'll put my stick in the ground and say we Indians are not great in teamwork, right? So Sam would have experienced it. I worked in, Raghavendra would have seen, I worked in Europe. We see that, just take a music concert. We have one singer and we have accompaniment 10 feet away from them, right? You see in Western orchestra, everybody's together and there is one guy, who does nothing but, coordinate stuff. So there is a cultural mindset about teamwork and we need to build that. It's not that we cannot learn it. Indians react to incentives better than punishment, right? So you need to find a way to make them work as a team, to answer your question.
Sudhindra, sorry to interject.
Sure.
One interesting thing that you said, I need to share this. You talked about engineers, and I'm myself an engineer. One of the things that you often observe, that when you're trying to take an idea to the market and make it successful, there are many types of problems you have to solve. You talked about execution, you talked about communication, there are financial, there are many types of problems. But often to an engineer, every problem is an engineering problem.
Correct.
And so, they try to throw a technological solutions for every problem, which is not necessarily the right thing. And that is the first thing I had to unlearn, that not every problem is engineering problem. It's not like if you have a hammer, everything is a nail.
Right.
Not everything is logical. You are absolutely right. People react to the same thing very differently. Yes, spot on.
Yeah, this is such an interesting perspective actually, because what happens is what the market wants may not align with what the technical team thinks is really good. And when the marketing team tells them that that's no good really for the market, it kind of demoralizes the technical team to think creative and stress their creative thinking.
Oh, it gets worse. It gets worse. Demoralizing is still okay. They get angry. They think everybody in the organizations are idiots now. They don't appreciate the value of innovation.
Right, exactly, correct.
Fire starts.
Right. Or they probably think the marketing team do not understand the value of our work.
They already know that beforehand. They start with that assumption.
So I'd like to take this to Raghavendra, where probably you can share some practical insights on how, I'm sure somewhere along your experience, you would have had these kind of situations where the technical team thinks they have a great idea, but as we discussed earlier, unless the idea creates a value for the customer will not be ready to pay for it. And unless we can monetize it, it's no use for the organization, right? So how would you actually bring about a harmony between the technical team and the marketing team if you were to translate an idea to an innovation?
Yeah, actually, for us, we are in technical ceramic space,
right?
And for us, I must say that collaborative work has really made all the difference. And today we are, 75% of our business comes from global markets.
Right.
And in QME and also in Murugappa Group, we have strong platforms for sharing best practices. And within our company in QME, we have inter-SBO collaborative projects. And we also have what's known as a platform for enhancement of career experience. This platform is basically, targeting especially the millennials to give them an opportunity to, express themselves and also to take up projects, which is actually sponsored by the leadership. So here it's very critical that the leadership actually, drives this. And by this collaboration, of course, there is some kind of friction as always between, different teams. But if we can steer through the noise and then keep, the end in the mind and also be agile, that's what is, worked for us. And I must also say that we also in our space, when we are trying to solve customers' problems, technical ceramics is a very knowledge intensive field. And therefore, we also need support from our vendors. For example, just to give you an example, if I have to achieve some, desired property in the ceramic, which, is going to make a difference to the customer's process, unless I have support from my vendor in tailoring the raw material to what I want or, what I desire because of the end in the mind, I will not be successful. It will just remain an idea. So therefore, it's very important to, tap across the value chain. And that's what, we do. And we have, while yes, Sudhindra also mentioned all the challenges, we also go through the same challenge. It's not that it's not there, but then, we are able to, work together, especially co-create products. Not only because in our case, our different businesses are spread. One in the just the raw material side, and we are in the finished product side. So unless I have collaboration with other division which is into raw material side, I cannot have a sustainable finished product that is meaningful. So therefore, for us, power of collaboration is really is really powerful, and it really works.
That's so interesting, Raghavendra. I think actually you took me back to my days as a vendor in Endika Ceramics for QME, where you actually, I mean, whatever you said, I can resonate so well. You actually look at vendors as your business partners.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's something that I have always been very impressed with. And today I'm able to relate to what you're saying better. I would like to start this with Sudhindra, actually. Earlier, when we never had the power of data, human data and machine data, whichever, a lot of the innovative work was happening more by trial and error, right? So it was trying to identify the pain point, amplify it, and then trying to see if the solutions fit the problem or not. More by trial and error, and it would probably take a long time to arrive at the right fit. But today, given that we have so much of data, sometimes more than what we want, to what extent has it brought down or eased the process of innovation and brought down the number of iterations of trial and error?
I'm a firm believer, and I have my own empirical data, why in innovation specifically, data is not the dominant force.
Absolutely.
In a way, it's very clear. I mean, recently I wrote a post as well on LinkedIn. Okay. All the data points in the fourth test of India-Australia, if you were to go by data, India should have attempted to win. Forget about draw, right? That's what data said. If you fed this to an AI algorithm, you would have thrown up an estimate saying, go for draw if you can. Otherwise, you're losing. So in logic takes you from one known to another known. That's data. Intuition takes you from one known to an unknown. And then you build something, your hypothesis, then you test that hypothesis, bring data to the table, then that unknown becomes known. Right. Archimedes did that, Newton did that, everybody did that. There was no, when the apple fell, there was no Newton's law that he verified. Right. He said the hunch was that there is something pulling it. And when Archimedes went into the tub, he said there is something that's between weight and volume that is acting here. The hypothesis and the data, the theorems came later, which prove. So in innovation, because if you remember new and useful, the new does not come in being in the circle, but it comes by being in a spiral. Right. So data helps to validate which problem we are going to go behind and why. Most often, you will not succeed in some of your attempts for whatever reason. And there is something called customer adoption, which none of us can control. Mm-hmm. It took 100 years for car to be adopted for 1 million users. It took 8 days for Google Plus, right? So the customer adoption is something outside the purview of this. But when it fails, there is obviously a question because you put resources on it. Why did we do this? That to answer this and be prepared and convinced upfront, you need data. Not to choose, but to justify something, whether you want to go put resources or not, what is the risk level or not. If everything is known, perhaps too many people are already chasing that problem, right? So the power of data can be helpful. I was telling somebody just 2 hours before I started this. If you give a CT scan to an oncologist today, they can predict cancer at the rate of 82%. Right. If you give that data to an AI algorithm, it goes to 97%. Use it there because it's a known to another known. But for an innovation, you have to be extremely careful.
So it's intuition does play a very important role and not just the data.
Absolutely. I mean, to put it simply, because nowadays, I think both Sam and Raghavendra said people respond to hype words. If you don't use IoT, if you don't use AI, they think you know nothing, right? So our brain is the most advanced AI engine for 1 billion years, million years, whatever you want to call it, right? So that throws up for you as in simple words, AI is you give the output, it gives the program. So right. Same thing is with our brain, right? So there is always a reason which we may not understand.
Right.
But yes, it's a huge role.
Interesting. Thank you, Sudhindra. Sam, how many of your innovative projects have you actually was driven by intuition rather than by a very formal design thinking process and data-driven analysis?
Boy, you know, I've never done this analysis. You know, every story begins at a different point, goes through a different middle and ends differently. And that's what makes it all interesting. Otherwise, there would be a formula. And if there is a formula, then I'm sure Sudhindra can convert that into algorithm. and then we can have bots innovating for all of us. I think, if you look at nature, and I take a lot of my inspiration from nature, because nature is a design that has been, that has evolved over 3.5 billion years. And so why do we think we can do better, right? And nature, despite all this evolution, is still using evolution to create new things. I think in any innovation, evolution is the necessary aspect. You will never hit it right the first time, the first idea that pops up in your head. You need to be able to evolve. The systematic approach that, there's a book that I would recommend that really influenced me a lot in early part of my career. It's by a bunch of ex-McKinsey guys who essentially wrote a very, it's a very small book, my kind of book that I can read on a plane in 2 hours. It's called The McKinsey Mind, and it talks about, a general problem solving thinking, and they have, it's something that every McKinseyite uses, and we all know that they've been successful across many domains and many types of problems. And there is something that you can learn from it. I call it the ME-C, or they call it the ME-C, mutually inclusive, cumulatively exhaustive. Basically, any innovation or problem solving is a search problem, potentially through an NP-complete space, a very large space in which you are trying to find something. It's not necessarily a single solution. There could be multiple solutions, but they are still very few in a very large space. And as a result, the systematic approach of searching for it, starting with clues, it's kind of like the same way a homicide detective would go about solving a crime. You begin with certain clues and an objective, and then you kind of navigate the search space. And every time you get more data by following a lead, you update your search direction, and that's the evolution that we talk about. And so I think I would be really surprised if there was any that straight up, without intuition or without any kind of evolution, kind of somebody thought of it, and next thing you know, it was a big hit or success. That is like akin to buying a ticket and winning it.
Right. Raghavendra, do you agree that this is more driven by intuition, and design thinking is probably something that can define some kind of boundaries for us to work within to make sure that we don't overrun on resources or on time?
Yeah, I can speak from our perspective. For us, a combination of QFD as a tool and design thinking is what is working. That's the first point. And second is you will always have a lot of data, but what insights do you draw from the data is more critical and important. So you can generate tons and tons of data. And today you have so many tools to throw out data, but then if you do not use the insights and you don't know how to interpret or meaningfully what I mean, that data is of no use. For example, we use a combination of simulation as well as site visits. For example, just to give an example, we solve customers' bulk material handling problems by providing solutions using ceramic to combat wear, erosion, and corrosion. One thing is to actually visit the customer site, for example, a mine, and try and understand the conveying what exactly is happening in the equipment. That's one part. And the second part is run a simulation, get the dimensions of those equipments, get the operating parameters, run a simulation. You get a set of data. Okay, the data says, okay, design the chute, for example, in a manner, whatever particular angle and so on. I don't want to get into the technical science behind it. But then we have to vet these two. You go there and you have also observed what's happening in that equipment, and what, if there is a jamming issue, what exactly is happening, and you have a simulation data. So both are important. So on one hand you have data, on one hand you have your insight based on the customer visit and the site visit. So you have to marry both these and derive a meaning out of it. That's what I think.
Great example. Thanks for that, Raghavendra. Actually, I was looking for some kind of a case study example that would be useful for the audience who are watching us, because a lot of them are from the B school. We are running out of time, but before I ask the audience if they have any questions, it will be great if you have any short innovation stories that you want to share with the audience, starting with Sam.
Boy, there are just so many of them.
But maybe one that can really be useful to the audience.
Let me put it this way. Since we are talking about data and insights and so on and so forth, clearly, during this pandemic, it's become critically important that remote working technologies are become important. It's come to a fore. See, besides the innovation and all that, there is usually the right time. The time has to arrive. Otherwise, you could be 10 years in advance and go bankrupt,
right,
or 10 years too late, and who cares? The timing also has to matter. And the timing sometimes is, just happens to be right for certain things.
Right.
So, with this, there is a lot of opportunity to innovate in automation technologies, in remote monitoring and remote, taking actions depending upon your field. I mean,
right,
we have large equipment in labs, and when people cannot go to the shop floors to operate these machines, or they have to operate it at a skeleton with a skeleton staff. So these kinds of technologies start becoming very important. And so we've been working on it over the last few years, luckily, what we call the EFI IQ series product, where, getting data and then help.
Please unmute.
Somebody has the microphone.
Yeah, Sajju Singh, please unmute yourself. Please mute.
Yeah. And so, this is something still, work in progress. This is a long haul thing. And most importantly, with that data, not only operationally, but we are now starting to look at how do we help our customers make the multitude of decisions that they have to make on every single day, from procurement to pricing to which customers to fire, and which customers to really roll out the red carpet for, what businesses to stay in, what businesses to get out. Call it sort of a nano McKinsey on the cloud at your beck and service. So this is something I'm very proud of, very near and dear to my heart. I've been working on it from the initial stages for over the last 3-4 years, and it started getting to a point now that it is showing some early success in market.
Great. So it only means that innovation does not necessarily mean only technological innovation. It can actually cut across various touch points.
Yeah, absolutely. There are multiple types of innovation. Uber is not a technology innovation.
Right.
Of course, they have to use all kinds of technology to make
platforms, right?
Business model innovation.
Right.
The whole sort of rental economy. Why own something when you can use as and when you need it? And so, yeah, absolutely. Innovation.
Yeah, so it can be in technology, it can be in business model, it can be in customer experience.
Yeah, customer experience, process innovation,
right.
There are all types of things.
Great. Thank you, Sam. Sudhindra, any interesting story that you would like to share?
Well, yeah, I think I have experienced that practically every one of us have an innovator in us. Since you mentioned B-school students, if the gang of students are planning to go to a movie, you'll always have one or two who says, I don't want to go to the movie. And the rest of them do not just give up and go. They find innovative ways to convince the two who said who would not come. Dinner is on me, ticket is on me, whatever, right? So, or when they get caught by a cop without a license, they become most innovative, killing the same grandmother for the 10th time that they know they were in a hurry and they forgot the license. So innovation is actually a way that we behave. So anybody in any department can innovate. Again, I made a post yesterday that somebody did a colorful set of pani puris. During pandemic, I was telling in April that the Little Italy place which makes pizza, they said maybe they should do it your own kit so that nobody needs to sit there and wait for the pizza. And so actually they did it in July, August. So what I'm trying to say is every area is a candidate for innovation.
Right.
Thieves innovate, politicians innovate, police innovate, technocrats innovate, technologists innovate, everybody innovates.
Right.
To end the message with a story, because you asked for it, there is a story that goes with Edison. I don't know if it is true or false, but it is very interesting.
Okay.
When people used to come and meet Edison at his house, they had to walk about 60, 80 meters to his house, actual building from the gate. So when they had to push the gate, they used to struggle because it was very hard, apparently. And everybody who used to come, they used to tell Edison, you do so many things nicely. Why don't you just fix the bloody gate? It's so hard to open it. He used to smile and keep quiet. So after many years, one of his friends said, today, if you don't fix it, I won't go home. So then he told, I know that it is hard, but it is connected to a pump. So every time you guys come in, you are putting water to my, tank. So innovation is the way you get things done. Right?
Being resourceful is also innovative. Interesting. Raghavendra, anything that you would like to share before we move on to the question and answer session? Any kind of experience across a B2B value chain that has really made an impact that you want to share?
Yeah. Using our core competency of ceramics, we have been able to look at helping our customers, especially in the automotive space, to add value to their process. And we have, in fact, now they've completely outsourced that process to us, and it's a new segment for us. So that's one example that I can think of. Another example is a very large, electrical giant basically buys a lot of ceramics from us, which is used as an insulator. These are specially made ceramics called as metallized ceramics, which the customer then raises to produce the insulator assembly. So this is something they use an alloy, and we have been able to adapt and change our process to remove one component of their alloy and incorporate in our process, which is basically helping them improve their process efficiency. So these are some of the examples. I'm sure others also will have similar examples, and already they have shared.
Right.
So it's very important when we talk about innovation. It's not just product innovation. It also is a combination of process innovation and also trying to see whether you can be a part of the entire customer chain and pick up spots which are relevant to your core, and you can expand your core and also look at adjacencies which will basically ride on your core. So that's what I would like to tell.
So innovation is not necessarily a big disruptive innovation all the time. It could be smaller innovations that actually make an impact along the value chain, right?
Absolutely. For example, Sam talked about faster, better, cheaper. It is all about being frugal. So it is basically, it need not be, exponential. It can also be incremental. Like in TPM, we say Kaizen, continual improvement. So continual improvement is also, innovation in a way.
Innovation.
Yeah.
Thank you, Raghavendra. It was indeed a great pleasure for me to be having this discussion with three esteemed panelists who have been associated with on one platform or the other. I was really delighted to do this, and thank you so much, Sam, Sudhindra, and Raghavendra, for sparing your valuable time and sharing so many insights. I'm sure this is going to be very useful when we record. I mean, it's already been recorded. When we play this later on our social media channels. Thank you so much for making this happen.
Our pleasure. Asha, if you don't mind, can I say something as a last word?
Please do.
It's kind of interesting. A lot of times people, I come to you and ask for advice. How do I go about and so on. And after sort of answering this question for many, many years and to so many people, I've come up with something that hopefully be of value to everybody.
Right.
The advice is very simple. Be patient, yet work with urgency. Be prepared for many setbacks, yet be optimistic. Have a strong self-belief, yet be open-minded. Dream, but keep eyes wide open.
Lovely. So they're so real and so valuable, Sam. Thank you for that.
Thanks, Sasha.
Sudhindra?
No, I think it's a very nice summary of what Sam said. It really makes sense.
Right.
It's everything that we should do. So I was just thanking you for hosting us. I was privileged to be sitting along with Raghavendra Pai and Sam. So thank you, both of you. So I enjoyed learning as well. And if from the audience perspective, if anybody wants to connect with us, at least I'm on LinkedIn, you could find me with this name and we can have a conversation.
Thanks so much, Sudhindra, for that. Raghavendra, final words?
Thank you, Sam and Sudhindra and Asha. So this is my first time on the show, and it's been a great learning for me. A lot of insights from this discussion. So thank you very much for this, and all the best to all the guys who are tuned in.
Thank you so much. It was my privilege and pleasure. And thanks to all the audience who tuned in. Hope you all enjoyed it.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, sir. Bye, sir. Bye, ma'am.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye, ma'am.
Bye.
Bye, ma'am.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Asha.
Thank you. Bye, Sam.
Take care. Raghavendra, great meeting you. I don't know if Sudhindra is still there, but really a pleasure to talk with this panel here.